I do it? How do I transfer to my email? Copy. Basically, yeah.
Okay, Shem, you ready? All right, a good evening to everybody. A good Chodesh. Wish everyone a great happy month. And of our 60 days of joy, of simcha. Should be Mevatel B'Shishim, as the Rebbe says, all of the negative and evil aspects within the world, that it should all be turned to good. Okay, so the good news is we're not going to have anything too revolutionary tonight. So no one, we're not, at least I hope not. You know, sometimes you come out, you're like, you don't know what this guy's going to say next week. But no, the Baruch Hashem, it's going to be more of, we're going to discuss, more like a Fabregan style, discuss different aspects from this week's Parshas Teruma, which of course is fully in discussion of the mitzvah of building the temple, building the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And we're going to go through different divine lessons that can be obtained in Avodas Hashem from different aspects of the parsha. We'll discuss the Messiah of being wealthy. We'll go into in the beginning, the mitzvah of building the Mishkan. This is a review of what we actually did last year. And in Mishkan, we'll go through a few sikhs of different divine lessons that the Rebbe derives from different aspects of the parsha. So let's begin. Basel and Mikdash V'Shechanti B'Seicham is listed as one of the big 613. It's a positive command that the Jewish people have upon themselves to build a temple. And as we know, this mitzvah was given at that time, and hence they built the Mishkan. And but it wasn't the end result of the mitzvah, meaning that the final goal of the mitzvah was eventually to build what's called a Beis Elamim, an eternal home for Hashem. And therefore, eventually, they of course built the Beis Hamikdash. The first permanent home that was built, in terms of that its building was made of stone rather than wood or anything else, was in Shiloh. In Shiloh, they finally had a bias. It wasn't the Mishkan, right? It was basically a foldable tent. It was made of the tapestries, the skins. It was mobile. So the first immobile home was in Shiloh, and then eventually, after how long were they in Shiloh? Does anyone remember? 300 and something years, right? Something like that. So only afterwards did they actually make it to Yerushalayim, such as we know the David HaMelech and then son Shlomo actually built it. So that was the epitome of the fulfillment of Asu Mikdash V'Shechanti B'Seicham. What was the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash or of the Mishkan? Why did Hashem? Right, I believe so, because that's the area that the area remains with its kedusha forever. So even though the building may have been destroyed in the Charbon, Kedusha ein zazim in kaima. Holiness never moves from its current location. This is different than the Mishkan. You bring up a good point that by the Mishkan it was called a Mishkan because it was a temporary dwelling place. The kedusha that it contained, when it passed through the various stops in the desert, it didn't refine and uplift that area forever. It was a temporary cleansing of the klippos. Not to get it wrong, it's explained in Chassidus that the Mishkan, going through the Midbar 40 years, cleaned up a lot of the klippos of the world. Right? It's brought down that Jewish people, through the clouds of glory, were protected from some very scary-looking scorpions. People today get scared when they see a little scorpion on the floor. Just imagine ones that are as large as a bean. It's from like a horror movie, right? So you have these huge scorpions and huge snakes that were in the midbar, and they were killed by the clouds. Yeah, they were killed by the Shekhinah that traveled with them, and the area that they built the Mishkan, that area contained kedusha. However, even though they were going through this mission of cleansing the Sinai desert of all the terrorists, the klippos, the mechablim, in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, the term mechaber is not just a Arab terrorist. Even if he's not Muslim, even if he doesn't have a body, but he's a spiritual being, it's called a mechaber. And so the journey through the Midbar was cleansing all of those physical klippos and their counterpart in spirituality, and was refining it. But nonetheless, it didn't elevate it to the point that there's actual likus and kedusha inside those spots that the Mishkan stood, as it is the case with the Beis Elamim, with the first and second temple. That there it's eternal. Right? No one says you can't travel to the Sinai desert because maybe you went to the spot where the Mishkan used to be and the Kodesh HaKadoshim used to stand. You might enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Very simple. No. The second the Mishkan moved, the Kedusha moved with it. So there is no worry of entering into a holy place because the place did not turn holy. Okay. What was the main purpose of the mitzvah of Va'asu L'Mikdash V'Shachanti B'Sayich? So the Parshas, we see that there are two different functions that the Mikdash fulfills, or the Mishkan fulfills. On the one hand, it finally creates an area where the Jewish people can offer sacrifices. Right? There's various opinions in the Gemara and Chulin, Flakes in the Bishmal, and the Be'akiva, in regards to what were the Jewish people allowed to eat meat or not while they were in the desert. So Rabbi Akiva, I believe, holds that they were not allowed to eat meat. Another opinion holds that they were. But in any event, the idea of bringing karbanis, that everyone agrees when you brought a carbon, you would be allowed to eat meat. Now, a Mishkan or a Mikdash, in essence, created that this is the official area where all those karbanis will be brought, and the avodah, the temple service of karbanis can begin, of eating the temple meat, etc., can begin. The idea, the avodah of karbanis, of sacrifices, is one of the most fundamental in Judaism. I mean, to us, since we're not used to it, we don't look at karbanis as something that important, right? No one really looks at it as like we're really missing out on something. Okay, so we're not slaughtering a few cows. We don't have to make a trip, every holiday to make a trip and bring 3 karbanos. Just imagine schlepping a cow, schlepping a sheep with all the kids. So we don't have to do all that. So and we can feel that it's not really okay. We're missing out. But in truth, when people who lived in the times of the temple, of the tabernacle, when Korbanos existed, when they look down into exile, into Gaza, this is not Judaism. One of the focal points and one of the most social aspects of Judaism was the idea of the pilgrimage and the travel and the Korbanos that were brought. It's one of the central tenets of Judaism, to the point that we find it brought down. We had a lecture on this 2 years ago, whoever remembers. The Alter Rebbe explains that to such an extent is Judaism without Korbanos not a Judaism, that we say that the real work of of Hayom La'asais only begins when we have the third temple and can start bringing sacrifices. Till now, this is baseball practice. We're practicing to get there. That's the Russian. We're practicing to get there. And once we have the third temple, then begins the real work, as only then do we have a Vedas Karbanos. Karbanos takes with it hundreds of mitzvahs, We can't do today because we don't have a temple. So one of the main purposes of the Mishkan was the Avodah of Karbanos. And without a Mishkan, we can't do a carbon. Now, even though back then, the truth is you were allowed to build your own mobile Mizbeach. So every person basically behind their tent had their mobile Mizbeach and would sacrifice on it. That's how it was. Until they built the Beis Elamim. I think it started from Shiloh once it was made of stone. No longer a mobile tabernacle, then it became prohibited to build a bama. No one was allowed anymore to build a bama, to offer their own sacrifices. It all had to be brought to the Beis Elamim to the set temple. The purpose.
When we daven, we say the Shana Slip. So I can't there they changed it to the past.
The Sham Asa. Okay. Goes with their philosophy.
No, but now that you're saying, I never thought of it that way either, how important it is.
Right. Well, yeah, because we're not used to it. We don't know Judaism with Karbanos, so we don't know to appreciate Judaism without it. We don't know the difference. We don't feel the difference. But that's why in the times when we read the history of first and second temple era, they viewed the exile as the end of life. People committed suicide. People viewed it that Judaism was over because they lost pretty much 3/4 of it, the whole social interaction of it that took place back then. But what is the spiritual meaning of Karbanos? This Al-Teb explains in many places of the Siddur. When the person takes the animals of the world and he elevates that to God, so it in essence elevates all of the animate and inanimate. As a cow, each cow that's sacrificed is representing his entire herd, his entire species of cows. So all the cows get elevated. Everything from Pnei Shar gets elevated. Together with that, cows eat a lot of grass. So all the vegetation also gets elevated. So the idea of a sacrifice is elevating to God many different aspects of it. So this was a major avodah that became innovated with the Mishkan and Mikdash. Salt is correct. Salt is emanating up. Yeah, true. This was the focus of the Rambam. The Rambam held that the main purpose and function of the Mishkan was for this avodah of Karbanos. The Ramban, Nachmanides, he took a different approach. The Ramban held that the purpose of the Mishkan was for a place for the Shekhinah to dwell. Both agree that these two things occurred in the Mishkan. The Rambam agrees that it was a place. The Ramban agrees it was a place that we brought Karbanos, like the Rambam holds, and the Rambam agrees that this was a place that God rested, as the Ramban holds. What are they arguing on? What was its main purpose? Was its main purpose the focus of the Karbanos? Main purpose the focus of having the Shekhinah dwell? In other words, was it a place for us to connect to God through Karbanos, or was it a place for God to connect to us through coming down? This is a machlekes rishonim between the two. They will discuss this idea in a number of different talks. Are there any practical ramifications? We don't know of any practical ramifications to this debate, but there is a discussion regarding what level of Shekhinah resided in the temple based on this. In any event, what the Ramban holds, the idea that the Shekhinah resides in the temple, and that was the whole purpose, he says the following. Matan Torah, we experienced God. We saw godliness. We had the greatest ecstasy of experience of godliness that you can have in this world. And suddenly, right after Matan Torah, it dropped. We were on a great downer after the upper. We can understand a little bit then of how we can succumb to such a sin of Egel Azav 40 days after the wedding. Because let's not forget, let's paint a little bit of a more realistic picture of what happened. It's not that they traded vows, the chassan and the kala, and 40 days later the kala, very unfaithfully went off. That's not painting an accurate picture of the news that happened. The accurate picture is that they had an unbelievable, most ecstatic time the day of the wedding, and the next day The chassan went on an overseas trip for 40 days. So when there's such a downer from the upper, you can imagine that there's a vacuum that people have that they need filled. And this is what lessons led to Chet Egel. The Ramban holds Hashem saw all this. We're going to discuss later on exactly when the instruction and command of the Mishkan was given. And nonetheless, the Ramban explains that Hashem saw all this, and therefore Hashem instructed and Hashem commanded to build a Mishkan that you will always have me near, that there will always be divine revelation with the Jewish people. So that's, in the Ramban's perspective, the purpose of the Mishkan. And people had this when people went to the Beis Hamikdash for Aliyah the Regel. It says more than they came to be seen, they came to see, that they would experience godliness there. And it was an experience of a lifetime that everybody had when they came. It wasn't just a dry, experience of where you bring your sacrifice and you kill the animal and eat steaks and meet friends. It was something very deeply in Tveikus with Hashem, in connection with God, that a person experienced, a sort of what we call an out-of-body experience, a very spiritual experience. And this is what created a magnet of people all over the world coming to Solomon's temple and coming to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, moving on. The mitzvah of the Aslan Mishkanti B'Seichem, does it apply today? So this topic we actually discussed last year. We're going to give a short summary of what we explained then, and which applies likewise today. And that's as follows. One way of learning it is that this is a mitzvah, the mitzvah of Aslan Mishkanti B'Seichem, that can only be fulfilled in times that we have control of Eretz Yisrael. Furthermore, it can only be fulfilled when we have King Mashiach. As we have a tradition, as the Rambam rules in his Mishnah Torah, that only Mashiach will build the third temple, no one else. Meaning, not that he won't have help, because if he has to build the whole thing himself, he'll do that for years. Not that he'll build the whole thing himself, but that he will be the person, he will be the architect, he'll be the instructor, he'll be the developer, he'll be the one in charge of the project. But to build a Beis Hamikdash without Mashiach is not a Beis Hamikdash. It's not a legal or a valid Beis Hamikdash. This is one of the arguments that the Rebbe used to explain to some of the religious Zionists of why you can't just blow up Al-Aqsa and start building a new temple. The Rebbe explained, because even if it were true that the Jewish people had control, which they didn't, but even if it were true that they had control of the Temple Mount, the Beis Hamikdash has to be built by Mashiach. So who's the Mashiach that's going to build it? We need to have Mashiach first to come, and that's the word of the Rambam, right? First you have Mashiach, and Mashiach reveals himself when he comes, and then he builds the temple, and the Kabbats and Yisrael. So until those things happen, until Mashiach comes, those things don't begin. But nonetheless, so obviously in the very physical sense of building a dwelling place where we can offer karbanis, that today we cannot do because of, by the way, there's a difference between Beis Hamikdash and Mizbeh, just mentioned, that's important to mention. While we agree that the Beis Hamikdash can only be built by Mashiach, which is the mitzvah of Shechanti B'Seichem, also the Mikdash, however, the idea of karbanis, it's not so simple. There are approaches who say that you can just go ahead and build the Mizbech if we know where you're supposed to build it on the Temple Mount. As if we have the jurisdiction, if we have the ability to, we can, if we were able also to figure out the exact spot, we could build the Mizbech and start offering karbanis on the Mizbech. No temple, no Kodesh HaKadoshim, nothing else can be built. But that alone can be. There is such an approach. Because of that approach, whoever was around back then knows that the Rebbe in 1967 instructed Chassidim not to be near Jerusalem on Pesach and Pesach Sheni. People, Chassidim who lived in Jerusalem had to travel away for that Pesach. They couldn't be in Yerushalayim for Pesach. They had to go away from home. It was every woman's dream come true. It was 2 years until, I believe it was 2 years. Why only 2 years? The Rebbe said he wanted to see the political situation. Basically, it was because of this chashash. Since the Israeli army took over Temple Mount in the 6-Day War, they now have control of the Temple Mount area. Now we have the jurisdiction. That's what it seems like. The jurisdiction is so, according to the opinions of rule, that you even today can build a Mizbeach, then if you don't build it and bring your carbon Pesach, you chayv kares. So in order to circumvent a possible kares prohibition, the Rebbe honestly instructed people to leave Jerusalem. And they left Jerusalem for that Pesach and Pesach Sheni, because they're both. If you get a second chance, don't do your second chance, it's again kares. So in order to escape a chash kares, the Rebbe and the Chassidim did it. They went away. Moshe Weber went, I don't know, he went to Bnei Brak, he went somewhere else. He left a lot of his whole pilgrimage. Chassidim packed up and stayed in Yerushalayim for Pesach. For Pesach Sheni. Came homeless.
I thought you were going to say because it was a big album, Chassidim were going to run up there and it's abundant.
So no, we can't do it because so you can ask on the other hand, so go ahead and build it. We can't build it, first of all, the IDF would stop us. That's number one. Number two, even if they said, go ahead, let's do it, we're in this all the way. We want to build a Mizbeach too. We don't have a Messiah, the exact spot that the Mizbeach is supposed to be, which can invalidate it. So because of all these problems, we basically have to polish our sides on all ends. So we don't build it because we're not sure, but we also don't stay in the area. But then the next year, 2 years later, the Rebbe said that, since we see that the Jewish people, the Israeli government does not have jurisdiction over the area, and it's given to the Jordan Wakaf, and therefore we're not in any different of a situation than in 1966 regarding that respect. So therefore, he said Chassidim can stay in Rabbi Zevin had a lot of correspondence with the Rebbe on this back and forth. He was arguing a lot with the Rebbe on this argument. He was bringing questions on the Rebbe's position, and it's a very deep, full of hundreds of sources of Talmud. He was also a great genius in Talmud, Zevin. So this went back and forth, but this was the Rebbe's position, and then eventually changed. So that's clear. We cannot build a temple on our own, or even the Mizbeach on our own, due to these problems. However, does the mitzvah of the Asli Mikdash, can it be accomplished in another format, in another way? So simply speaking, no, you cannot. The only way to fulfill it is by building an actual temple for God. However, we find in sources that the mitzvah of the Asli Mikdash was given a few other ways of being fulfilled, other than the literal sense that we can only fulfill once Mashiach comes. The first one is, anyone remember from last year? Okay, so famously, it's brought in the Medrash. It's brought in Sefer Yecheskel, and the Medrash expounds on this discussion that Yecheskel had with Hashem. That Hashem instructed Yecheskel to instruct the Jewish people after the destruction of the temple to start learning the laws of the temple and measurements of the kelim, the areas of the temple courtyard. And Yecheskel said back to God, I really don't understand why add salt to injury. Why rub it in? They can't build it. It's destroyed. Why on earth would you make them learn this impractical information? When once again we have the ability to rebuild it, we'll learn it, but why now on goes? So Hashem famously said back, as the Medrash explains on the verses in Yecheskel, that because my Mikdash is destroyed, therefore its building should be ceased. Learn the details of the building of the Mikdash, and I will consider it as if you are building the temple. So from this Medrash, we see that learning the halachos is considered, in a certain respect, as if you're building it, and that is how today we can fulfill the mitzvah of also the Mikdash. By us learning it, and this is something not novel specifically to this mitzvah, but also with karbanos. We know with karbanos that we say karbanos every morning. And the Jewish tradition is that the saying of karbanos every morning, which some of them, even women should say, right? The carbon talmud, every woman should say it every morning. It's a chiyuv, so a nashim. Women could say all the karbanos, but an obligation is the carbon talmud. Those karbanos are said not just as a memorial. We're remembering what used to be. We don't want to forget the history. No. Right now you're bringing a carbon when you say it. You're not bringing the carbon in the physical sense with your physical hands on a physical. You're doing it in the virtual world. Today we do everything virtual. We work virtually. We make money virtually. We don't eat virtually. Maybe one day we'll do that too. But pretty much everything's virtual. But we don't say it's not happening. how many of us actually have ever seen the money we have in our bank? Never. It's just going from one bank to another. It's virtual money. It's numbers. Okay, but it's real. Just because you don't have something physical doesn't mean it's not real. So the same idea is with karbanos. When we say the karbanos in the morning, it's not that we are just retelling what used to be. We are fulfilling at that very moment the karban in the realm of speech. And right, whoever reads these paragraphs, Hashem considers it as if they have brought the karban. To the extent that we find halachas written that you have to do things similar to the way it was done in the temple. For example, you can't say it at night. The karbanos have to be said by daytime because you can't bring a karban by night. Sorry, you can only bring it by day. So if someone wakes up before Alei Shachar, they want to get this day started. They start zipping out the karbanos. Hold your horses. You can't bring karbanos now. But I'm not bringing. I'm just remembering. No. You are bringing karbanos right now. Now, to Rebbe Durkama writes based on that, you have to stand when you say it. Because if a kohen, when he brings the karban, sits down, it's possible. It's invalid. The Maisa, we don't rule that way. In the second version, the Alter Rebbe retracted from that position, and the Rebbe explains because the Alter Rebbe explains there's because if we're going to be so exact, then only Kayanim should be allowed to say it, because only Kayanim can bring a karban. If a non-Kayan brings a karban, it's also no good. So we obviously cannot compare it regarding everything, but nonetheless, there is real halachic comparisons because there is, in a certain respect, a fulfillment of bringing a karban taking place through learning. And the same idea we learn from this medrash applies likewise by building the Beis by building the temple. The mitzvah, the mikdash, can be fulfilled today in God's eyes through us learning the halacha. So when we learn about the Mishkan was the first temple. It's you can call it the architectural diagram of the final temple. We fulfill this mitzvah of Hilchos Beis HaBechira, building the mikdash. Another way of how this mitzvah of building a temple applies even today in a literal sense, as opposed to the only sense that it used to be fulfilled, which is building the actual temple, is in regards to building a shul. Tzemach Tzedek learns based on a medrash that when we build a shul, which is a mikdash ma'at, that too fulfills the mitzvah of the asur mikdash shanti b'seif. We're fulfilling a positive command in the Torah to build a mikdash. The fullest intent of it is the one big base medrash, base HaKnesses, which is the temple itself in Jerusalem. However, the little temples, the mikdash ma'at as we call it in Hebrew, that's also a miniature temple and a miniature mitzvah of the mitzvah of also mikdash shanti b'seif. And therefore, as always was in Jewish culture and Jewish history, we take tremendous pride and necessity in building shuls and communities. We don't say, I'll donate my basement, everyone can come to my basement. No, we build shuls, we build specific houses for this purpose. And due to this, we find that shuls have special halachas, quite similar to the Beis HaMikdash. Such as, just like you cannot in the Beis HaMikdash, right? You cannot talk about mundane things, and you're not allowed to do calculations of money there, and the person was not allowed to eat other than the korbanos. So too, ideally, those halachas apply in a shul. Now, the fact that we see a lot of people who don't keep this doesn't change that from the law. Eating is something else. Regarding eating, even though ideally you're not allowed to eat or drink in a shul, you're not allowed to, and you're not allowed to sleep in a shul. Today, all shuls are built in what's called Tnai Bezdin, which is basically, it was built with a stipulation that it won't be holy regarding eating and drinking. This just became too difficult for Klal Yisrael to not eat and drink in shul. I mean, nobody would come. So they just, a shul without a kiddush, how popular are they? Right?
No, but they have a side room.
Some.
And they have
the wealthy shuls.
And they have chatzer.
The wealthy shuls, yeah.
And there was a lot of lectures where to honor not to eat in the shul.
Yeah, there are shuls who do that, but shuls today, the status quo is that they're built on this t'nai, and therefore it is mutter to eat and drink. One thing that still remains usher to get drunk, and now they get drunk in the shul even today. No t'nai can help, because that's already a belittlement of the shul. Can't belittle the shul. Simchas Torah, Minhag Yisrael is to break a lot of the laws. It's brought down in Poskim. A lot of the accepted laws are bended. So you can't start up with Simchas Torah. Simchas Torah is its own day. It's, Purim, it doesn't have to be done in shul. This Kedushas Beis HaKnesses is very important. We see the Rebbe pick up stuff from the floor. The Rebbe complained that the Chassidim are leaving the shul dirty, and the Rebbe would pick stuff up from the floor. And, the idea of Kedushas Beis HaKnesses and all this and that is we have to treat it like a mikdash. It's a mikdash mat. It's a real place of holiness. To such an extent does this holiness apply that it's not just in regards to the different halachas applicable to a Beis HaKnesses, but as well with regards to different things that you can't do around the shul. Here in Eretz Yisrael, it's very common, for many different reasons, for shuls to be created out of bomb shelters and buildings. And this, ever since its inception, has raised some very serious shilas to the validity of doing such a thing. And the reason is as follows. Allah and Shulchan Aruch is it's forbidden to do a belittling act on top of a shul. Inside a shul, there's nothing to talk about. But even on top of a shul, you can't do anything of a belittling act, such as go to the bathroom. So if on top of your shul, which is in the downstairs basement in the bunker, there's a bathroom, it's a big problem. The Taz, the Turizad, the David Alevi in the 1600s. So in his commentary, he writes that he debated in the past the exact definition of this prohibition and when it applies and when it doesn't apply. But he writes the following: I saw with my very own eyes and I had to feel on my own flesh the great severity of this prohibition, as I had two of my sons passed away due to what I am attributing to our living on top of the shul. Two infants on top of a shul. Yeah. So this is something we take very seriously. If somebody wants to build a shul, like a permanent shul, I'm not talking about having a minion once in a blue moon. I'm talking about a permanent shul. This room will now be a shul inside of a building. They should bring it to a rav. It's not so simple. They're not allowed to make a sakana of the whole building because they want to build a shul. So therefore, it's something that has to be brought to arbitration to discuss. There's ways of doing it that it shouldn't receive the kedusha and then it shouldn't have the effect. There's different things that could be done. But in general, if there is a bathroom on top of the area, it's a big problem.
Question. So when I listen to some lectures of, I think it comes to Sephardic rabbis in the Sephardic hour in the radio that they do, and they're telling the stories that how living really close to a shul versus living on top is different, I guess. They
Absolutely.
say how can you say, blessings and how good.
When you live close to shul, right? I think he's referring to people who maybe aren't so firm and therefore won't. They'll drive to shul on Shabbos, or they live too far and they won't walk to shul. But first of all, it says it's brought in Shulchan Aruch and in Talmud, the further you are from a shul, the more schar you get for the walk. So it actually brought down.
But it's also limited how many steps you can do.
It's actually brought down. If you have two shuls and one is further away than the other, and therefore you should go to the further shul. And this is why we see something very strange amongst Klal Yisrael. I've always wondered about this. One second, let me finish. I've always wondered about this, that you see people who live so close to the local shul always go davening somewhere else. Why? So one answer is politics, but another answer is because of that there's this extra schar for going to the further shul.
They did put some limitations. Rabbi Lipsker, Bell Harbor, Florida. And they were giving like limits how far.
How far what?
They let us understand.
How far what?
They were giving us exactly the measurements, not to pass certain amounts of walking. Not for a group.
No, but the issue of the problem of Tchumen is not an issue in Miami because it's one big city. It's all one city. So that's not.
It's not about the roof. It's about like I think the way I understood it, that it corresponds with, it becomes like a really blood, sweat, and tears to walk farther than what you're allowed.
Okay, well, maybe talk to him and get back to us what his reason was. We're going to continue. We got another aspect that we find it in, that of the Kedusha of the Shul, that it's similar to a temple, to the Beis HaMikdash, is regarding people who are impure. So Allah in Shulchan Aruch, chapter 88, that women are accustomed during the cycle not to enter into a shul. This is similar to the law by Beis HaMikdash, that a person who's impure would not enter into the Azor. It's from Shulchan Aruch, chapter 88.
So women are not allowed unless they're...
It's a minhag. No, there's different... It depends if a woman who goes every week to shul and it would be noticeable that you didn't show up, then it's allowed. It's not an isser minatin, but it's an acceptance that women took upon themselves because of the great kedusha of the shul, great holiness of the shul. You can look it up in chapter 88 for more details on that. But we also find similarly regarding Saita. Even though today the mitzvah of Saita no longer exists, as we don't have a temple, we don't have a kain, we don't have a temple to give the wife, the suspected wife, the milkshake to drink, right? The fruit shake that was done, or I should call it the earth shake. It was more earth, right? Earth shake. However, there are stories recorded of Saita checkings happening even today in synagogues. I don't mean today, but I mean past the destruction of the temple. In a sefer written by one of the students of the Chidah, he writes, I witnessed my teacher, the Chidah, when he was on a pilgrimage. He was on a tour collecting money. He was a Shadar Eretz Yisrael, and he was in a certain town in Italy. And in this town in Italy, when he would come, he would always go to the local, in each city, he would always go to the local library and look at different manuscripts. He was very great, prolific author and scholar. And he would also take in questions from the community. He would collect money and deal with spiritual questions. And one of the wealthy members of the community came to him and complained about his wife. He suspected his wife for committing and not being faithful to him. And he said the Chidah instructed him to bring his wife to the shul. He brought his wife to the shul, and she was standing. He asked her to stand by the steps leading up to the entrance of the shul. And the story is that he asked her to read the psukim from the Torah of the Saita. She read it, and this is what he writes, and whatever happened to the Saita happened to her on those steps. People saw this, people were in shock. And one of the Gevirim of the city decided as a memorial, to make a memorial of the incident. They inserted a gold step in that area with the inscription that this is where the Saita story took place. I've heard people who said that they've seen it. I haven't seen it, I don't know what it is, but I've heard people who said that they've seen it. So this is another story of where the Kedushas Beis HaKnesses, and this is one story, there's a few stories that are brought down of this type, that the Saita checking can take place in a synagogue and a shul due to its Kedusha. The third way of fulfilling this mitzvah. So far we said learning the laws, right? Learning the laws of the temple is fulfilling us of the Mikdash. The second way is through building a shul and treating a shul with proper respect like you would to the temple. And the third way is, as we learned last year, if you remember, that when a Jew makes for himself a set area within his very home, that this is here his private abode of learning Torah and davening and doing chesed, then that area within the home becomes a mikdash. So the person can literally fulfill the mitzvah, also the mikdash, the shechanti b'seicham, which is going on each and every person individually within his personal house. So even though we find the Gemara in Brachos, and Shulchan Aruch it's brought down, a person should always set for himself a set place to pray. which means that if you go to shul, you should try to have a set place where you daven. Obviously, person shouldn't be militant about it and push people aside. But you should try to be in a certain area. So too in the home, and the reason it's brought down in Svarim is because where a person davens and learns in a set place, the kedusha remains there. So instead of having to start from zero each time, you can now start off the kedusha you've already gained from the previous time. And this is why it says a person should set for himself a set place. And the Olam of Tefillah, Rabbi Yechon says, the person who davens in a set place, his tefillahs are accepted because he's banking off the kedusha that he's been investing in for the past every time that he went there and davened there. And so too that this idea of making a set place in the home, that home contains a kedusha in it, and we should treat it with the proper respect. And that also fulfills the mitzvah of the Asur B'Mikdash.
Is that one of the schools some years ago that I had that not pace as a heaven?
Well, you definitely don't paste on Shemona Esrei. Well, that's the main. When the Gemara in the Shulchan Aruch refers to also what they say have a set place for Shemona Esrei. It's referring mainly to Shemona Esrei. But this idea we're talking about extends to all davening and learning, that it should be a person should choose for himself a little corner, a little area. A few set places. Splitting the kedusha. It's like having money in a few different bank accounts.
Not having a shul in the building. The women don't go to shul.
Right.
Women daven in their own.
Right.
They have a place where they daven.
No, that doesn't.
In a building.
No, that's not a problem. What I said is a set shul with. First of all, if there's no Sefer Torah, it's not a problem. It's only if it's a real shul, a set shul. They daven on Shabbos, they daven during the week. It's a full minyan, a full set shul. And that's when there was a shiloh. That's when the shiloh comes up. Okay, we're going to move on now to the structure of the Mishkan. The structure of the Mishkan versus the Mikdash, the Alter Rebbe explains in a Hasidic discourse in Torah R that they contrasted, they were very different from each other. The Mishkan, as we're learning in this week's Parsha, was built from wood and skin. Animal skin. Hide. Animal hide. Right? The tapestries were all made of skin. That represents, in the spiritual correspondence, the world of Chai and the world of Tzemeach. Wood is Tzemeach, right? The cedar trees, which are said to be the highest and the tallest. Some people say that the red bark trees that grow in California. Anyone know what I'm talking about?
Sequoia.
Sequoia, it's called?
Sequoia.
The big ones?
Redwoods, right. You said a different name.
Sequoia.
What name is that? That's English?
That's the
That's in
name
English?
of the
Sequoia?
place. Sequoia.
Sequoia.
That's the name of an Indian tribe.
Yeah, it sounds like an Indian tribe to me.
What do you call that acacia?
Right, so the acacia wood, so some say that that's what it is. Some attribute, right, and it's a very tall tree.
Yeah.
And it's a very wide tree. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't imagine you should haven't carried that out of Mitzrayim.
They have
Those-
cars going through the tree.
Yeah, those are
They
huge
have
trees.
it's very famous place.
There's still some left after all the fires. In any event,
Right.
so the cedar tree, though, what's brought down is that it was the largest and tallest tree, represented the king of Tzemeach. The Rizal explains that when we see something big, a big mountain, a big tree, a big whatever, it's not just physically big. Its malach is much bigger. Its power is much bigger. Its spiritual power. Its mazel is a much more powerful mazel. The Rizal explains in Sefer al-Gugulin, Shar Gugulin, that in fact the mazolis, the malachim that are in charge of different mountains fight with each other. Who's going to be the leader? Who's going to be the top one? So he says, if you pay attention over the passing of 1,000 years, you would see some mountains going low and some mountains going high. And so let's talk about Mount Everest in 1,000 years from now. Maybe it'll be a midget. We'll see. But in any event, so this is, the bigger you are, the greater the mazel you have. Similar to what's explained, what the Maggid explained regarding doctors. The more of a famous doctor, the more money he charges, the greater his malach that can heal you. And so therefore the cedar tree was considered the king, the highest spiritually of all the vegetation, and that's what was brought in the tachash, right? This animal that's now extinct. We don't know what it is. It was a beautiful, multicolored animal, not like a zebra. That's just plain black and white, but really more like a peacock, I guess. But in animal skin, it was very beautiful. So these are what was used for the Mishkan, and that represented elevating these things to Hashem, as we've already mentioned. But it was done in the order of Ishtalshus, right? It started off with Semeach, the lower level. The floor was obviously diamond, inanimate, ground, right? The ground was just earth. Silver's also, right, silver's inanimate, okay. I mean, there were copper. Copper. The chutzner. Yeah. Okay, they're both inanimate, copper and silver. So we started off with the lower level, which is the wall, which is made of skin, and we have the wood, which is the tzemeach. The bottom is the diamond, which is the inanimate, and we have on top the skin, which was the hide, which is chai. So it went in order of daimon, tzemeach, chai. And the mikdash, however, was all made of stone. It was all stone. There was no wood, and there were no skins anymore. There were no skins used, and there was no wood used, unless it was used inside, secreted within the structure, but no external wood could be seen in the temple. And the Alter Rebbe explains, and this is because in the Mishkan we were following the order of the world in the items that contained greater qualities of kedusha, of spirituality. So obviously there's more life in the animal kingdom than there is in Semeach, in the vegetative kingdom. And there's more life in vegetation than there is in inanimate. So therefore the order was from bottom to top, inanimate to vegetative to animal. However, in the Mikdash, we follow the secret, subconscious spiritual powers contained within the creations, and stone actually has the greatest potential of them all. Therefore, the final temple, in the Beis Elam, in the first and second temple, and the third temple we rebuilt, it's all made of stone. There's actually also a source that says that also love it, the Beis Hamikdash will be part of it will be made of metal, iron. That's something discussed also, but that's also inanimate. In the making of the Beis Hamikdash, of the Mishkan, the order that it was made in was first we made the chutzner, first we made the surrounding, the walls, and only afterwards was the furniture built. And the reason for that is, explained to this, is that it was made in a way that the walls of the Mishkan represented an encompassing light of God, an infinite, so to say, relative to us, light of God. And afterwards, the Tzalon, the Jewish people, built the furniture, the kalim, right, the mizbeach, the menorah, the shulchan, the table, etc., which represented internalizing this light. So the entire temple represented a method of not just having God be revealed within it, but how this revelation of God can talk to us and can become internalized within us. This is what we said before, how when we would come to the pilgrimage, we would experience God. And it wasn't just that God came to see who showed up for his days, but we would experience him as well. This was due to the way the Beis Hamikdash was built, the way the Mishkan was built. Okay, we're going to now go into the donations. The donations of the Mishkan. So right at the beginning of this Parsha, Vichli Truma, that Hashem commanded Moshe to command the Jewish people that everyone should donate sums of money for the sake of building the tabernacle, even though Moshe was very wealthy and he could have built it quite easily himself, or with a few friends, a few, very wealthy men, maybe have Kairach, his cousin. Sure, they would have worked it out on their own. Hashem wanted every individual to give a donation and to have a part in the building of the temple. And one of the reasons for this is because, once again, this is an individual mitzvah. The Karban Tamid that we say every morning Also in the times of the temple, we helped purchase it, all of us. When we would give in the times of the temple the half shekel donation, that half shekel donation that was given to us was used to purchase the animal, the korban, the sheep that was sacrificed daily as the korban tamid of the morning and evening. 1 second. And the treasury would explicitly state that every day's korban will have a small portion of every person's donation. So every morning when the korban was brought, we were bringing it. It was from each individual. Machzis HaShekel in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, Machzis HaShekel was from age 20. That is true. It's a machlekes if women gave. There's a machlekes if children gave over bar mitzvah. It's machlekes, but it was definitely over age 20. It wasn't 60 as a cap. No, the question is, did they have a part through their husband, or did they have a part individually? So machlekes if women gave. Machlekes Rishonim. Okay, so this is the beginning of the donation. The Rebbe explains as follows: the half shekel donation that we gave, there were a few times that we gave it, but one of the times, right, it says Teruma, the half shekel was used. It was a silver coin. Was used to make the sockets of the Mishkan. As we already said, the sockets of the Chatzar were made of copper. Chatzar, just to understand, in comparison to the temple, just like the temple contains the walls of the temple and then has the Heichel, which is the Kodesh and Kodesh HaKadoshim, it has the inner building, which inside of there is the Menorah, and then further in you have the actual Aron Abris. So too the Mishkan was built in a very similar fashion. The Mishkan basically had a courtyard, okay, which was surrounded by skins and cedar wood as pillars. And then if you walked 50 amas in, because that was 100 by 50. So if you walked 50 amas in, you would reach the entrance to the Heichel, which is the Mishkan. And that's where it contained the silver sockets, and that's where it contained the menorah, and that's where it contained the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But for example, the Mizbeach HaOila, the copper menorah, or the copper Mizbeach, or Mizbeach Adama, it's alternatively called, the earth Mizbeach, that was inside the Chatzar. It wasn't inside the Mishkan. Just like in the temple, the altar was outside of the Heichel, outside of where the building that housed the Aron, so too it was in the Mishkan. So the half shekel donation, the half silver coin that was given, went towards building. Literally, it was melted, welded down, and formed into the sockets that stood up the pillars of cedar wood that were used to hold up the skins, the tapestries. So, what is its meaning and correspondence? The Rebbe explains as follows. This was the only donation, the donation of the Adonim, of these supports, these sockets, that every Jew gave equally. All the other donations, Hamar b'va'amamit, some gave more, some gave less. Some gave more gold, some gave less gold. Some gave more, skins, some gave less skins, some gave more of the precious metals, other gave less. There was every single person was able to decide. The only donation, meaning the only item that was built in the Mishkan that every Jew was equal in terms of his donation, were the sockets. That's the reason. So the Rebbe explains that the sockets correspond to the level of Kabbalas Il, the level of service of God, where a person accepts the yoke of religion, accepts the yoke of God, and that idea of accepting the yoke and doing the command, every single Jew is equal in. There's no difference between a righteous Jew or a non-righteous Jew. Everyone is equally obligated in the commands, and everyone's equally able to do the commands. How they do it is something else. The feelings and emotion and kavanas, intents and concentrations of the more righteous is incomparable to that of the less. But in terms of the action itself, that everybody is equal. And the reason why this was being emphasized is, says the Rebbe, as Hashem was trying to teach us a lesson. And that is that before a person begins elevating himself through the ladder of service of God, he has to first start with the first step. And the first step is the idea of Kabbalas Il Malchus Shamayim and Kabbalas Il Mitzvahs is where we don't start religion backwards, where we say, we'll keep what we agree with, and what we don't agree with, we'll keep out. In other words, if a person keeps all the 612, but there's one mitzvah he says, I really don't like that one. I'm fine with all the other ones, and I'm actually, I'm a great patriot of them, and I tell them and bring them to people, but there's one I just don't like, and I'm not into it. So he hasn't started the ladder of religion yet. So it's great that he's fulfilling 612, and obviously every Jew has to fulfill every mitzvah, and we don't tell him because you're not fulfilling one mitzvah, therefore don't fulfill another, God forbid. That's another mistake that some people may have, that if someone is an apikaris, for example, let's say he's a real apikaris going to halacha, so we think, we shouldn't be doing mitzvahs. Not true. Every mitzvah Jew does is important. The Rambam writes that even Yeravam ben Nevat is going to have a claim against him in heaven. Why didn't he do the rabbinical command of Erev Tavshilin? The Yeravam ben Nevat, you're dealing with here, the worst drug dealer in history. You're talking about a traffic violation. You're telling me he stopped. He didn't look at the stop sign. That's what you're going to hold him accountable in court. The prosecuting officer won't even talk. They'll throw it out. They'll tell the police, get out of here. We're dealing with this guy on 30 life sentences. What are you bringing a traffic violation? But no, says the Rambam, every individual will have everything held accountable, even if it was a big rusher. If he did Erev Tavshilin, it won't be on the list. If you didn't do Erev Tavshilin, it will be on the list as well. So the idea that if you don't do everything, you don't have to do anything is wrong. But at the same time, religion can only begin if a person accepts the will of God as it is his will. Meaning not your will, his will. And that's what Kabbalah is. Kabbalah is that a person accepts, and this is something that goes back to our discussion 2 weeks ago, where Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim and gave us a Torah for us to be his avodim. Now, an Eved that gives conditions to his master, I do this, but I don't do that, pretty much like a lot of the cleaning ladies today. I do this, but I don't do that. Then you're basically purchasing yourself a master. She's the boss. And so, this is the beginning of the Avodah, the idea of Kabbalah Sil, is where a Jew comes all in to accept what God has to tell him. Furthermore, and another nakuda, even when a person has tremendous feelings of emotion and love for God, that itself has to be due to the Kabbalah Sil. It has to be due to the fact that God commanded him to do it. In other words, that the service of Hashem has to always retain, even when we fall in love, this respect of a master to his servant relationship. It can never leave being the Eved relation. It can never leave being the relationship of where the servant accepts the yoke of his master because he's excelled and now has a tremendous feeling and is on board with this master and king and loves him. It always has to go back and retain that. This is something that the Rebbe explains was the mistake of Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech, as we know, now we're in Adar. We'll be having Parshas in about 6 weeks. So Shaul HaMelech, he went ahead and he killed Amalek, but he left Agag and the animals. He didn't kill them. And when he was questioned by Shmuel, why didn't you? He said, because I had a great idea. I would sacrifice Amalek's animals to God as karbanos. Now, if God gets pleasure from regular cows and regular sheep, which are little tumah when they're brought up to heaven and brought to godliness, certainly he'll have great pleasure when this epitome of impurity is elevated to him. That was his cheshbon. But what's the problem? It's like Kabbalah Sil. God told him to kill everything, so don't come up now with your cheshbonos. Don't come up with calculations. And this idea can, in other words, that when we begin implementing our own seichel to making decisions of right and wrong in Judaism, that's when we know we've gone off. If we use that to override the books, if we use that to understand what the books say, what the books instruct us, then we're using our seichel, our minds, for the right thing. But if we know what the books say, and we say, you know what, my seichel tells me differently. We see this time and time again. This is what has led person after person, leader after leader, to go off, and in most cases, they don't leave a very good legacy for themselves or their descendants when they swerve from the path of Torah, when they swerve from what it says because of their great innovations that their minds thought of. And this is the idea of Kabbalah Sil. The Kabbalah Sil is to have a guidebook that you don't swerve right or left. On the donation of giving gold, so there's a famous talk that the Rebbe gave in, I believe, 1992 or 1991, one of the two. And it was quite revolutionary in what was stated there. And before we get to what was stated there, we're going to just open up already the discussion about gold, which is money, which is wealth. So as we know, everybody wants to be a millionaire. Everybody wants to be wealthy. Who wants to be poor, right? Everyone wants to win the lottery. Look how many people play. You don't have to do that much research and statistics to see how many people want to be wealthy. You just see how the lottery's been around for so many years. And it continues and continues and continues. Everybody wants to be rich, right? Who wants to be a millionaire? Everybody wants to be a millionaire. So there's a lot of discussion in Jewish texts regarding, in literature, Jewish literature and Musar, regarding to be rich or not to be rich, the question. Now, we think about it and say, what kind of question? It's not like I can choose, and it's not like I can press a button and say, okay, I decide I'll be rich. It's given to us from God, and it's something we pray for. But that's the question. Should we pray for it? Should we strive for it? Is it something good to have? And if it is, then are there any ways that the Torah instructs us that we should do something to become wealthy? So let's first begin. There are three channels of blessing that God created in this world for a person. Unfortunately, quite often the way it works is that one comes on expense of the other. Most people don't win the lottery in all three channels. What are the three channels? One is bonai, which is having children. That's A. B, within that, healthy children. C, within that, spiritually healthy children. Okay, so within Bana, you have a few different gradations, a few levels. Chaya is health, that a person be strong and healthy, that he be strong and healthy, that his family be strong and healthy. And Mazaini is sustenance. And within that, we have a few levels. We have a simple level of that he has enough to eat. And then we have a person who's middle class, and then we have a person who's very wealthy. So there's different levels of quality in each one of these three. Now, often, most people don't get all three. Most people will not also have, the happily ever after dream. They won't get a full ray of blessing within Bonai, Chaya, and Mizay. It's very rare. So some people that are very, very wealthy, but for example, they wouldn't have the bracha in children, or they wouldn't have the bracha in Chaya Chas v'Shalom. And often, when people would come to Baal Shem Tov and other of the Rebbeim for brachas in wealth, the Baal Shem Tov would ask, you want it to be on the cheshbon of the other two? I'm working with a certain amount of alikus here. I have the ability to maneuver it. But are you sure that's what you want? We have many stories of wealthy people who came to tzaddikim for brachas, and the tzaddikim told them straight up, so listen, you're pestering a lot about this. You've asked for 20 years ago. Money you know now. If I give you the bracha, you're going to lose all your money. Are you ready to make that commitment? You have the story with the Baal Shem Tov on a number of occasions. It's written in Kunshas Umayan. A certain wealthy chassid of the Baal Shem Tov for many years was begging for a blessing for children. He was childless, him and his wife. And the Baal Shem Tov told him, I'm able to bless you, but the bracha is only going to switch the channel to where the elikus is coming through. So you're going to lose all your money if you have a child. The Alter Rebbe's great-great-great-grandfather, Segal of Vitebsk, his wife's. This is his father-in-law. He was married to a Segal, a very wealthy Vitebsk family. So their great-great-grandfather had a story with, I believe it was one of his son-in-laws, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it was in Vitebsk, and the person was named Nachum, a very, very wealthy individual, not a lot of money, but he was childless. And when he was 60 years old, one of the students of Rabbi Leo Baal Shem of Worms. Leo Baal Shem of Worms was one of the first Baal Shems before the Baal Shem Tov, of course, before the Baal Shem was in the 1600s, a story. Before Abadim Baal Shem. And so he had a student who was a great Kabbalist. And this student was passing through Vitebsk and was staying by the home of Nachum, this very wealthy man who was childless. And he asked him if he can give him a bracha for a child. And he told him I could, but he said exactly what I said. The channels will have to move. You're going to lose all. If I give you, he said, if I give you the bracha, one of the two channels are going to close, either Bana or the Mazaini or Chaya. And he understood from this. His wife Taka became pregnant 3 months later, and she had a daughter. But before she had a daughter, he fell ill and passed away. He knew he was going to pass away. He knew already that this was going to happen. So, we shouldn't always be jealous of a wealthy person, because not everyone gets blessings in all three areas. We wish they do. We have no problem, but we have to look at the realistic picture. So that's regarding the channels of bracha. Now, should a person be wealthy? So this was a major debate in Jewish philosophy as well as amongst Hasidic Rebbeim. We had some Hasidic Rebbeim who lived very poor. And we have some Hasidic Rebbeim who lived the life of a luxurious king, such as the Ruzhiner. You saw the Ruzhin, he lived like an aristocrat. He lived like a king. He had a huge palace built for him. Palace. He had a palace with, 5 beautiful horses, a huge wagon. Now, all of his kalim at home, everything was gold. This was all beneath his standard. This wasn't gold, no gold cups, no silver cups. Everything was gold and silver. Yeah.
Gold shoes without silver.
Right. They say that about a few of his wealthy king-like. Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin, he was a grandson of the Maggid of Mezrich, a great-grandson of the Maggid of Mezrich. He was a famous Hasidic Rebbe, a great tzaddik. But he famously was of the position that wealth does belong to the Jewish people, and it's a good thing for a Jew to be wealthy. But when his Chassidim were asked, not all of his Chassidim were wealthy, by the way. He was, he lived a very wealthy lifestyle. And when they were asked, how can your Rebbe do such a thing? So Chassidim answered, Shaita Shabaylam, who do you think God created wealth for? For the Pritzim, for the Rebbe. That's who God created wealth for. In any event, they say also Rebbe Marash was also this type of mentality, very wealthy king. He was, on his own right, very wealthy. He was a businessman. Rebbe Marash was a very successful businessman. Okay.
So he was very wealthy. What about the two others in the name?
Okay, so the Ruzhner I don't know about, but the Rebbe Marash definitely suffered tremendously in health. He had tremendous health problems. He passed away at 48 years old, Rebbe Marash. And there's reasons, there's records brought down regarding why the Rebbe Marash held of this sheet of wealth and being very extravagant about his lifestyle. Which years? Well, that's how the Rebbe Rayatz describes his grandfather. When the Rebbe Rayatz describes in one of the sikhs, the Rebbe Marash, he describes him as a very wealthy person. And the Rebbe Rayatz in his young age also took over, and he was also a businessman. He also had money in his young age. Rebbe Rayatz.
I read in Crown Heights that he played the lottery, won the lottery several times.
The Rebbe Rayatz?
Yeah. No, the Rebbe Marash.
Oh, the Rebbe Marash.
Yeah. And that was a contribution to his wealth.
Could be. But nonetheless, these are all with Tzaddik and Rebbeim. They can handle their money. But not everyone can handle their money, right? The Gemara says a person is judged b'kasei b'kisei b'kaisei. A person is judged by his money, how he works with his money. And so therefore, not everyone is a tzaddik to be able to handle it properly. Being an usher is a very great challenge. In what respect? Well, obviously regarding tzedakah, that's a simple challenge. The people who pledge the most tzedakah are the people who tell Hashem, if you give me the money, I'll give you this much. The people who don't have the money pledge the most, because it's so easy to pledge money you don't have. But when you actually have the money and you have to start making the calculations, we don't realize it. But we're going to read this from the Alter Rebbe, very interesting. We don't realize it, that having the money comes with a certain challenge that you never experienced before. It's a new experience. It's not something that, in other words, that the generosity that we naturally have now when we don't have the money, if we were offered $10 million, we would think about already now all the tzedakah organizations we would help, etc., will start. But then actually when we get the money, we'll start thinking, well, I got to worry about my kids and college. And then you see how much you have left. The Alter Rebbe says like this. The Nittler Rebbe asked the Alter Rebbe following question: why do we see that wealthy people are naturally inclined towards arrogance in Bali Gaya? And he asked the following. This doesn't mean, by the way, that all wealthy people are arrogant, but it goes with the right.
Let's see how we.
Gam Eilish he says like this, that we see that there were people who were mamish very humble chassidim, very humble people. And suddenly they became rich, and their characters suddenly changed. So that's an Alter Rebbe. And they become arrogant suddenly. Why? Why does this happen? The Alter Rebbe answered, the idea of being wealthy, what is being wealthy, is that you have a lot of leverage on society. You are raised above society. You have been elevated. The idea of elevation is the nature of arrogance, and therefore it comes together. When a person has something that's a lot greater than everyone else, he's staring at from a much higher mountain than everybody else, and he naturally feels higher than them. In other words, that there is a natural feeling of hisnasos, of arrogance, that comes with the money of being wealthy. And then the Alter Rebbe continued. The chamber of wealth is between the Garden of Eden and Gehenna. So he says. And to the Heichel of Ashiris, there are two doors, one opposite the other. One door leads to Gan Eden, and the second leads to Gehenna. The Sabo, the Baal Shem Tov, said that Ashiris, by one individual may be Gan Eden, but by another individual may be Gehenna. And Alter Rebbe explains. One who utilizes his wealth for charity and Torah mitzvahs, that wealth itself is Gan Eden. The one who doesn't use it, but rather he uses it for himself on physical luxuries, or to hold in his bank account, the Oitzer, the Ashiris itself becomes his Gehenna. So we see that being an usher is not the easiest thing in the world. And this we know. We know that people who win the lottery, they are not the happiest people. They are, in fact, they become poor very quick. They lose I think they're the fastest loss of money of an individual is by people who win the lottery. But maybe that's for different reasons. You have a businessman who works hard for the money. He for sure doesn't have such a happy life because he's so busy. He's so busy the whole time in doing business deals and worrying about making an investment here, an investment there. It's stressful. It's not an easy ride. It's not an easy ride. There's a lot of nisyanos that come with Hashus. So the Rebbe famously in a Fabregan in Tafshin Gimel, I believe it was, Tafshin Dalit. The Rebbe spoke about this in length during that talk. It was a talk on Purim, Tafshin Dalit. And the Rebbe spoke about the challenges, the great challenges that a person who's wealthy has. One of the challenges we're saying is being busy. One of the dreams of being wealthy is that you can sit back on a lake and enjoy life. But most people who make money, it's a Messiah. One who has 100 wants 200. They want to make more. And this is the story of all the people who lose their wealth in the stock market or investments. They don't pull out on time because they just see their growth continuing, and they say, I'm not going to take a chance of losing another buck, so I'm going to keep it in. But they keep it in until the stock market does its flow, and then they lose everything. And then, unfortunately, there are people who do that. So, they always want more. And so they're always working. One individual came to Reb Marash, a wealthy chassid, and complained, I don't like this Nisayin of Ashiris because I'm too busy, I don't have time to learn. Reb Marash told him, you're a shaita. As you think a person who's poor has time to learn, be happy Hashem gave you the Nisayin that you're busy making more money, and if you don't have time to learn, then you're busy trying to make ends meet, you don't have time to learn. That's what Reb Marash told. So there's always two sides to the story of the Nisayin of an Asher, because there's also a Nisayin of an Anis. So anyway, the Rebbe bounced back between this. And then the Rebbe asked by the Fabregan, so who wants to be rich? And after this whole Mussar Shmooze about the difficulty and challenge of being rich, which chassid would be stupid enough to raise his hand? And that's why of that crowd, only 3 people did, as the Surah goes. 3 people raised their hands. And they became extremely wealthy individuals. And those people raised their hand. And the Rebbe actually afterwards was very upset that most of them didn't raise their hand. He said in the Fabregan that there was a tremendous auspicious hour right now for wealth, for a bracha for wealth. And this was, he used the term chabatska shtusim. This was how do you translate chabatska shtusim? This was narishkeit, nonsense of Lubavitchers. Like, they don't want to be wealthy, they don't want the sun. That's what Rebbe could describe. He said, you have the ability here to be wealthy. If Hashem gives you wealth, take the Messiah and work with it. That was the Rebbe was upset that more people didn't raise their hands. But this was the situation. And the Taka did become very wealthy. And I don't know all of who these 3 people are. In terms of the candidates, there's about 50 of them that people say who they are. There's a lot. No, I'm saying the rumors of who were those 3 people. It's there's a lot of different rumors of who they actually were. I've never heard from someone who was there to say it was him and him and him. Even in the Sikha, they don't write who the people were, but they say we know who they are, but they don't write who they were. There's one individual who everyone says in the fuss, he was there. But in any event, they obviously know. We know. Well, as I'm saying, there's about 50 candidates. So it's like the Rebbe Rayatz appointed 10 chassidim in Russia in 1922, 1924, the pact in the Mesiras Nefesh. But if you calculate how many people say that was my grandfather, there's about 3,000. So we don't know.
So that famous question was asked after.
Yes, it was. After Fabregan of giving that's why I prefaced and said it was understood why the Chassidim didn't raise their hands, but it was an auspicious time. But this changed then in it officially changed in 1991, or it was 92. I don't remember if it was in the Malcolm days. Parshas Teruma, this week's Parsha. The Rebbe there said the following.
There was a very big recession
There was a recession
in the U.S. 1991, right? Yeah.
Yes, the Rebbe said the following. Yeah, it was Tafshin and Beis. Parshas Teruma, Tafshin and Beis. The Rebbe said them Fabregan as follows. The Kol Reish Nolan Mikash Kadosh Baruch Hu Pesach B'Teirasa Kadesh. We learned from the fact, the whole discussion ensued in the Sikha regarding why Zahav is listed first in the counting of the metals that were given, why gold is listed as the first one. So he says the following. Hashem paskins in his holy Torah, and the Torah is everlasting, it's eternal, for all generations and all places. Shekol echad ve'echad Yisrael, that each and every Jew, Shaykh l'chol reish l'zav, belongs to the side of gold. The pashtus, simply in simple words, this means Shekol echad ve'echad Yisrael, that each and every Jew, Tzarech lias ba'ashiris, is obligated to be wealthy, needs to be wealthy. Hein beruchnius, both spiritually, vein begashmius, and physically. Spiritually means, well, let me explain what this means, wealthy spiritually. Wealthy spiritually means that he has a lot of mitzvahs. He chases after mitzvahs and searches for mitzvahs and does mitzvahs whenever he can. He's wealthy in mitzvahs. It also means he's wealthy in Torah. He doesn't just fulfill his obligation with learning the bits and pieces of Torah of information, but he wants the wealth of it, the depth of it. He takes all the details of Torah knowledge. And the ruchnis is also referring to working on a person's character. So in other words, that living wealthy is being successful in spirituality. That's wealth in ruchnis. And the gashmis, ashiras b'pashtus mamish, is talking about having a lot of dollar bills in the bank, a lot of numbers in the bank account. Right? Very simple. Ashiras b'pashtus. So first the Rebbe said that every Jew needs to be rich. Then, from here we have a directive. What's the directive? I'm telling me I need to be rich. If I don't see the numbers going up in my bank account, how does that help me? So he said, the Rebbe then concludes there's a directive in Avodas Hashem from here that we have to learn. The Jew has to place effort to do his part to try to be wealthy in all of his activities. Starting off with being spiritually wealthy, to tell himself that he can become a Torah scholar, he can become a Baal Gemilas Chasadim, that he can become a Baal Mitzvahs. And it's not beyond his reach to open up the horizon and believe in oneself that you have the potential ability to live the Jewish version of the American dream, the Jewish dream. Ein asher elo badas, a person who has a lot of knowledge is an usher, little knowledge is an ani. He should be usher in Torah and mitzvahs. That's first off. He has to endeavor to do that. The adgam, and I'll tell you the truth, this sikha is what propelled myself to write my books the way I write them. Most English publications of Svarim of Halacha, they don't believe in feeding too much information to the English-speaking crowd. I've had publishers tell me that explicitly, that they don't want. When I brought one of my books to one of the first years that I was publishing, before I self-published, I brought it to a major publishing house, and they were amazed, but they said there's too much information here, too many footnotes. English-speaking crowd, they need simple information, like just one source. Don't give me 10 sources, one source. Don't keep it super simple. No, the Rebbe demands ashiras baruchnius. A Jew has to be wealthy. A Jew, there's no reason why we have to keep English-speaking crowd as paupers in Torah. They can be wealthy in Torah. This is one of the heroes. But the Rebbe then continues. V'adgam ashiras b'gashmis. A Jew has to strive to be physically wealthy, so he can fulfill Torah and mitzvahs with tranquility of the mind and the body. What does this mean? What this means?
After that, he asked, "We want to
No,
be wealthy?"
No. This is almost 50 years later.
Okay.
And isn't
This is 40 years later. Right.
So they don't even have a choice in that, huh?
So first of all, number one, even though a decree was made, it's possible for it to be overturned. Just like Bas Pliny LaPliny can be overturned, sure. The Balach and Shulchan Aruch, the same Talmud, which states that it's decided in the 40th day of conception of the Mona Nida in Saita 1, Saita 2a, that this person will marry this person, says, quickly get married, get engaged, Kedushin, even on Chol Hamoed, even on Tisha B'Av, because maybe maybe someone will take her before you. Who's going to take her? It was already decreed and said in heaven. Decreed in heaven, but decisions can always be, it's not in the Supreme Court yet. This was the first court. Decrees can always be torn. What do you mean? Us Jews were always tearing decrees. There was always decrees written and we're tearing decrees. We're always overturning decrees. So even a Jew who was decreed on him, he shouldn't be an Asher based on his mazel. Hashem can switch his mazel. No problem. We'll do the switch, musical chairs with the constellations, and now he can have the mazel of an Asher. There's ways of working around. Furthermore, even a person who was decreed that he has the intuition to be an Asher, if he doesn't strive for it, he won't make it. Let's give a very simple example. If a person is working a 9-to-5 job, which most people do, and not to put down employees in any reason, shape, or form, but it's very difficult to understand how that is a vessel created for wealth. Because 9 to 5 job, you're getting paid the same amount of money every hour, every month, no matter how much your boss makes or doesn't make. So the wealth is always going to him. The success of your work is his bank account going up, not yours. So when a person has, a regular job, it's not really understood how he's able to strive to become an usher. What's explained is as follows. So I want to, before I explain this point that I just related, I want to go back, step back a little bit. It's explained in Chassidus that Hashem's bracha is found b'chol asher tasa. Hashem blesses a person in all that he does, and that explains the famous contradiction between effort versus trust, right? If you need effort to do effort, then why do you need trust? If you need a trust, why do you need to do effort? If God gives everything, then why do I need to do anything to get it? I'll just trust him. Why do I need to go to work to make money if I have absolute trust in God? Or the opposite, if I have to go ahead and go to work, then why should I trust in God if I have to put trust in my employer? If I have to actually go out and do something. So Chassidus explains that Hashem is the one who gives the paycheck, but you need to create a physical hand to stretch to him to receive it from him. If you're not going to show up at his office, he's not going to go to your office to give it to you. Hashem's not going to knock on your door and give you a truckload of dollar bills. It doesn't happen. A person has to go ahead and do the receptacle, do his ishtabus to make it to the door of God. And that's through creating the physical occupation that he does for Hashem's blessings to pour through. So that's a known concept and known idea. What's explained in some sources is as follows. Once you have Hashem's blessing of Ashirus, doesn't matter how much ishtabus you do. Whether you do more, meaning put more effort, or put less effort, you will make what you will make. And this is brought down in a number of different sources, that no matter how much more work you do that year, you will still only make the amount that was set for you to make that year. You won't make a dime more and you won't make a dime less. On the other hand, it's explained that it's possible to widen the channels of the budget of wealth. This is a mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek. This mimer is basically what we can call the secret of business, the secret of wealth, this mimer. Where it doesn't mean everyone who does this will become wealthy, but it definitely fulfills what the Rebbe here is saying, to strive to be wealthy. The Tzemach Tzedek explains there, in this mimer, that basically the kli has to be commensurate to the blessing. So what I said before, the person wants to become wealthy, then he has to create for himself a channel that has the potential to bring in that wealth. But we'll just give an example. If a person, not to put down employees in any which way, but just looking at it from a factual perspective, if you're working from 9 to 5 job, getting paid minimum wage, it's not a halachic kli at this very point. Maybe you can get a promotion, maybe something will happen, but at this very point, it's not a halachic kli that has the ability to bring in the widened channels for wealth. However, when a person has a business, when a person runs something, when a person has an independent item they offer to society, that has the potential of growing. And the Tzemach Tzedek says like this, that the kli has to be broadened based on the amount of wealth the person wants to bring in. And of course, this doesn't negate bitachon, because the bitachon person trusts in God, that God will send him the wealth through the kli that he's creating. But it's not enough to just, go ahead, well, I need to make a kli, so I'm going to go, once a month, I'm going to go do a 1-hour job for someone, and that's my kli. You're creating a tiny cup for a spillage of a huge amount of water. So, based on this mimer of the Tzemach Tzedek, the way we fulfill this directive of being wealthy is it's a complete change of perspective for Siddim after this directive. That when we have the opportunity of being able to broaden our income, we should strive for it, and we should do it, obviously in a responsible manner. Right? That goes without saying, doing proper research, as they say. If someone offers you a, 30%, 30% annual interest on your money, you know the guy's stealing your money. These are such basic things. Nobody can give you 30% of your back on your investment. That's what Ponzi schemes are. So a person obviously has to be smart and vigilant and know how to call something that's a fraud. But nonetheless, when we have an opportunity to invest, a person should horizons of wealth in fulfillment of this. Now, at the same time, we have to also focus on the last points that Rebbe mentioned. Real wealth is not how many dollar bills you have in your bank account. Real wealth is where you're wealthy enough to do what you like to do in life without worrying about money. That is the definition of real wealth. Because if you're so wealthy that you're worried about money, you're just like the poor guy. You're both worried about money. You're just worrying about an extra dollar bill that you have no need for anyways, and the poor guy's worried for the extra dollar bill because he had a need for, but you're both stressed. I once spoke to an individual whose parents' father was at one point worth $500 million. And I asked them, I was very interested in knowing how they grew up and what it was to grow up in such a affluent home. And so they told me that you won't believe this. It was horrendous. I mean, what do you mean horrendous? You don't understand the stress my father went through. He says, I'll never forget. There was one night when there was a crash in the stock market in his country, and he lost a few $1 million. He woke up in the middle of the night screaming. The whole house woke up screaming. It's stressful. Person who has so much money that they worry about money can become very stressed. So, wealth.
You don't have a problem.
At the same time, we need to have enough money to, as the Rebbe concluded, to be wealthy enough to have no impediments. Right, a samech bechalka is a nice term. It's a nice term, but we don't want to use a samech bechalko. One second, we don't want to use a samech bechalko to have to figure out how am I paying for my kid's wedding, how am I paying for the bar mitzvah, how am I paying rent this month. That's not what the Rebbe wanted from Chassidim or wanted God to give us. Hashem wanted that we should all be wealthy to the extent. He sent wealthy philanthropists with them.
Just have to meet.
Right. So listen, we have to do our job. Our job is to do the shtadlus, is to endeavor in these areas. Whether we actually become wealthy, the ruchnis and the gashmis, it's in the hands of Hashem to bless us. But the point of this was what we have to do is that we have to endeavor to, again, defining wealth as to be well off enough not to worry about money, so we can focus on the real things in life, the real things that matter. Avodas Hashem, doing, putting our part into the Jewish world that we would like to invest. And so this, when a person is worried about money and needs to make ends meet, that doesn't allow him to do so, unless he's able to work. And everyone spoke about this in the past. When a person is able to work in the field that he, in any event, wants to be doing, so he, in essence, has the best of both worlds, because he's like the wealthy man, because he's doing what he would anyway want to do. And a lot of people are blessing that. The Rebbe told a lot of Chassidim in the early years, there were a lot of the employment positions in chinuch that were available, and a lot of people didn't want to do it. And the Rebbe told the Chassidim, I can't understand why on earth you would want to do these jobs. As in this job, you get the benefits of both worlds. You're able to have a position in Ruchnius and Torah in a real Jew, a fulfillment of a Jew that you can really be proud of for your life. And that is the channel for you to make your money. And everyone wrote in a letter that the Rebbe Rayatz arranged that Chassidim in Eretz Yisrael are able to have a channel of Parnasa through Kedusha, through matters of Kedusha. So this is also similar to that. So Mirz Hashem, may that bracha of the Rebbe be mekuyim by every single person in a way that it be wealth, ruchnius, wealth begashmius, and that the wealth shouldn't get to anyone's head. It should be just enough to be able to give a lot of tzedakah and not have to worry about money. Any questions on this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said there is the divine energy comes for everyone through three things.
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. Yes. So very, very good question. I understand your question, believe me. I don't want, the question is, why on earth should we want wealth on Cheshbon of the other two?
אז אני רוצה לענות.
Okay.
ב-2007, אני הלכתי בתל אביב בבחירות, אז זה יותר מדי קשה להצטבר באנגלית, זה בסדר?
We'll translate. We'll explain.
ודחפו אותי לכיוון דוכן של מפעל הפיס. מי דחף אותי? אף אחד. I was pushed, but no one was there. And באופן, זה לא היה בחירה אפילו, זה היה מיידי, הגוף שלי. עשיתי, לא רוצה. אמרו לי, ממש מלמעלה, קחי, יש לך פרס במפעל הפיס. אמרתי, לא רוצה. הקדוש ברוך הוא, אני מבקשת, הייתה לי משנה. לא כסף. הלכתי הביתה, וישבתי וכתבתי את התאריך לידה שלי, ושל שני אחים שלי, והמספר שאני, זה סכום של הולדת שלי, וזה זכה ב50 מיליון שקל. אז לא, אני לא יודעת, אני לא קניתי כרטיס, למרות שאמרו לי משמיים, לא היה אף אחד ברחוב. האוויר דחף אותי לכיוון המפעל הזה. ואני אוטומטית, זה אפילו לא היה בחירה, זה היה הנשימה שלי, הנשמה. ישבתי בבית, כתבתי את זה, ובטלוויזיה ראיתי שזה זכה משהו כמו 50 מיליון.
וואו.
נהדר.
בזכות
זה, נשארתי בלי כסף, בזכות זה, הגעתי לצפת. ובזכות זה, היה לי סכום מסוים לקנות רכב, אמרתי, אם אני מוכרחה כבר לעזוב את אזור המרכז, הילדים שלי, הנכדים שלי, ואני צריכה לעבור לצפת, אז שמרתי סכום כסף בשביל לקנות רכב, כדי שאני אוכל לראות אותם. ואז פתאום פנו אליי ואמרו לי, את רוצה לכתוב ספר תורה? אמרתי, אני צריך רכב, מה אתה עושה לי רוצה? ולקחתי את הכסף הזה ונתתי לצפת סתם. ואז עברתי לצפת, והספר התורה היה כמעט מוכן, בעילוי נשמת הוריי, חודש לפני היורצייט של אבי, א' כסלו, ב-2015, זה 3 שנים נכון, 4 שנים, 3 שנים נכון. הגעתי לבית חב"ד בעיר העתיקה, ורב צעיר העביר שיעור, ובסוף הערב זה היה ראש חודש חשוון. חודש לפני א' כסלו, אמרתי לו, תעשה לי טובה, תקשר אותי עם בית כנסת פה בצפת, כי אני עם ספר תורה שמוכן עוד מעט, וכבר א' כסלו כבר עוד חודש, ואין לי בית כנסת להכניס לספר. אז הוא אמר לי, בואי אלינו, 12 בלילה, אני שואלת מי זה אלינו, אז הוא אומר לי, בואי אחריי, ואנחנו רצים בסמטאות של העיר העתיקה, ומגיעים לישיבת ההסדר. הרב היה יעקובוביץ', והספר נמצא היום בישיבת ההסדר. אם אני הייתי זוכה במפעל הפיס, היה לי כסף, לא היה לי את כל הקדושה לחיים. וברוך השם, ותודה לאל, וזה לא היה בחירה, זה היה, זה.
So she said a story of where it exemplifies the story of the Baal Shem Tov, where it can be a switch of the channels, and therefore she was happy with where she was, that she didn't get the channel. But you're asking a good question. Why would the Rebbe want to bless Chassidim to have wealth on cheshbon of the other two? And the answer is, Chassidim would say that the difference between a Rebbe and a Gute Yid is that Gute Yid was a Polish terminology used for Rebbes in Poland. Said that a Gute Yid has the ability to change the channels of the Bach. But a Rebbe is on the level of Yehiratz, and he can create new budgets of Alekus for the channels. I heard this from the Mendel a few times. And so in any event, not directly from him, just passed away. But
but
let's finish. Let's just finish this point. But the point is, obviously, this directive of to strive to be wealthy is not chas v'sholom an expense of any of the other two channels, and therefore we have to also make sure it doesn't come to the point that it's an expense of any of the other two channels. So, for example, if a person uses his wealth to become then very busy in his business, and he doesn't put enough time in Torah learning and in making his home with his wife and children a real Jewish environment and a Hasidic environment, then he's actively chipping away from his other two channels. It's within his reach. If he limits his wealth, I'm wealthy enough to live a good life. I don't have to worry about money, and I can do what I need to do in life and invest time. And this is how it was. We read stories of individuals and the responsible, wealthy individuals, how they work only 3-4 hours a day, and they spend time learning. They spend time and they invest in the child's chinuch. They don't let the wealth get to their head and get to control their schedule. It's a big challenge, but this is a challenge that the Rebbe says I want people to have. We'll just conclude with one more point, and that is that in, I believe it was the 70s, I could be mistaken, the Rebbe was with the Kapshnitzer Rebbe. The Kapshnitzer Rebbe was by the Rebbe in Yechidus, and a discussion regarding this subject ensued. The Rebbe asked the Kapshnitzer Rebbe to give a bracha for Klal Yisrael to be wealthy. The Kapshnitzer Rebbe said, I don't feel so easy about this. I'm really scared. And the Sayin of the Nashir, and he began, backing up that he's not really. And the Rebbe kept on pressing him. He says, no, you have to pass in the Bnei Yisrael need to be wealthy. He said, being an ani is also an Sayin. You're always doing tricks to make more money. You're doing all the scams. You have to, work 9 to 5, be on food stamps, and then to, all the different scams we know of in order to make ends meet. It's also big Sayin. The Rebbe was trying to convince him. We don't know what happened in the end of that conversation, but the Rebbe wanted very badly that he ask him as a Rav that Jewish people have to be wealthy. So Mirza Hashem will do our psak tonight, that the Jewish people are zav and deserve wealth. They have to strive for wealth and get wealth, and all the channels should be rightfully balanced.
Question, is there 2 days of the Rosh Chodesh or 1?
There's 2, but it's already over. Tonight
over?
It's over. Yeah.
Tonight is over.
So, we get in the Persians.